So the power of choice, manage infrastructure for decentralized applications. Let me just move this thing here out of the way. Great. So who am I? I think like many people already know me in the community, but to give like a brief overview, also like for the newcomers, I've been roughly about 25 years, I think, in IT now. I worked 17 years at Siemens and Atos, so 10 years at Siemens, then 7 years at Atos, when Siemens carved out most of their IT towards Atos as a service provider. And there we can already see why service provision is so important, because also Siemens thought the same. We are operating our IT systems, and then you just need to ask yourself the question, what are we going to operate ourselves, and where do we build core know-how around it, and what do we outtask essentially to a provider, which only task it is to provide these types of IT services as best as possible, and then of course with the lowest cost possible. And at Atos I was responsible then for several global managed services, and the last 2 years the lead architect and CTO for the Telefonica account. And this was like a year after, or 1.5 years after Telefonica bought E+. So there was like a huge migration going on with like 180 applications. So there was a lot of things to be seen. Yeah, and then I had like enough of the corporate space for then after 17 years. Then I joined the IOTA Foundation, started to work with other multinational corporates in order to see how we can implement the technology into the use cases and into the technology stack of those customers. We did a lot of proof of concepts, a lot of MVPs, tech demos, and so on. But we also have to say that the technology underwent like so many changes that it was also hard to keep up. So I think it's like good that we are reaching a major milestone with IOTA, and that we then have like the confidence that customers, projects, and so on, they can like really utilize the technology, build on it, and not be afraid that their work is in vain. But this is also by a service provider is like really good, and I will come to this in a second. Yeah, and then in end of 2022, it was like December 2022. Regine, Kimo, and I, we founded Spice because we wanted to provide this infrastructure and enable companies to utilize certain blockchain aspects or blockchain or Tangle utility. I'm always saying blockchain already a bit like automatically, but of course it's like the Tangle, because we were seeing after all these talks at the IOTA Foundation with those corporates where they are struggling and where they're having like major pains in order to really adopt cutting edge and bleeding edge technology. And we founded Spice 5 with the intention to make everything around IOTA and of course then Shimmer as easy as possible. So everything which is complex is being put behind the curtain, and the companies, they can like easily integrate their services through simple to use APIs. And then they also don't need to think about scaling and like many other aspects. I want to give like a brief history about managed services and managed service operation, because I also don't think that this is like really clear for a lot of people where this is coming from. So like in the 1960s, it essentially started when the first networks and the first computers like evolved. And then very quickly it became clear that you will need somebody with an expertise. And then like the creation of like network operation centers and essentially like outsourcing and outtasking started to give IT tasks to somebody who essentially like who knows what they are doing, no? And who can operate it in a professional way. And this was then heavily accelerated in the 90s with ITIL, the IT Infrastructure Library, which described best practices. How do you operate your IT services? So, and you might think this is like quite easy or a thing to run it under your desk, for example, or in your own data center, but actually it's quite complex because you need to cater to so many requirements. Like how do I do incident management when something is happening? When something is happening like more often, how do I do like a problem management? If an error occurs and it has a big impact, how do I treat this as well with, let's say, a major incident management process? How do I do my capacity management, that I'm confident that I have enough capacity to be future-proof for the next years? How do I do How do I organize my data center, for example, storage management, all of that continuity management. If my data center is flooded, how do I ensure maybe I should have 2 data centers? How do I ensure that this handover is like also working as expected? And then, so there's like a number of best practices, and ITIL described this like very well. It became like the de facto standard for infrastructure operation, because it's also very flexible. And then we move towards infrastructure as a service. And this is essentially in the early 2000s, like who is like, I would say like older than 25 years or 30 years will probably remember this. So this was the emergence of virtualized infrastructure. VMware was everywhere. And then like very quickly the cloud evolved because, and also with those service providers, especially like AWS, because AWS at this time they were Amazon, they organized their book sales and then expanded the marketplace, but they very quickly recognized that what they are doing for their IT to build this large scale marketplace is quite valuable for everybody else as well. And this is then how AWS was born. And this is like how the whole cloud movement, I would say, was born as well. And then it moved towards like in the mid 2000s towards IT service management. And this was the first time where the IT processes and the business demands and the customer needs were brought together to show or to understand how can we provision IT and really IT services with a customer focus in mind in the end, while still making business with it. And what we are seeing now is essentially like still today, like here's the infrastructure as a code. So essentially when everything become a lot more automated, you program your infrastructure. So you want to say if a certain value is reached, let's say in CPU terms, then I want to deploy another instance, and automatically this instance should be available to the customer as part of my normal capacity, so that I do not need to spin up a server manually by hand and then configure it under the load balancer and so on. So everything of this was then completely automated. And now we are moving like for the last, I don't know, like 2 years, something like this. 2 or 3 years, we have like the emergence of Kubernetes and so on, what is called like GitOps. GitOps. So essentially, you take this infrastructure as a code provisioning, you move it like also towards a repository, and in the repository, you can then immediately see which version did you deploy. You can like make changes. You can have like deployment pipelines as well, like very easily set up. This is already part of the infrastructure as a code. But essentially, you have like more transparency, you have version tracking, you can roll something back with ease, and this is like providing a lot of flexibility. Yeah, and when we look at decentralized applications, it's also quite interesting to see where the whole Web3 went. So like in 1970 to 2005, we were in the first stage. I don't know, Web 1.0, now the internet. Then it moved towards Web 2.0 with Facebook, Instagram, and so on, where we had like large cloud providers. And we are starting to see like a value shift because everything was consumed on mobile with the emergence of mobile technologies, but it was still owned by large platforms. And you did the payment also with those large platforms, with PayPal, Visa, and so on. And since 2021, roughly, we are seeing the emergence of the Web3, where we have a tremendous shift towards a creator economy. You can own your own data. You have like completely different leverage factors when it comes about you promoting something. Like, imagine this, like when you think 20 years back, how you promoted something to your audience. Now you can be your own brand. You have all the leverage to not only like to raise capital, but to deploy applications on a global scale with a finger click, to do marketing on a global scale. And you can do this essentially as a one-person show. This is like absolutely stunning. We see DeFi evolving as the first killer app for Web3. So we start to see how decentralized payments are working. And with this, we see this value revolution. We see cryptocurrencies. So payments and the trust in certain aspects of the data, in the mutability aspects and so on. But payments are becoming like a natively integrated part of the internet. And this is absolutely like thrilling what we are seeing in terms of decentralization. So it becomes like very attractive to develop your own decentralized application, of course, as well. And then this is like the summary. So we have like a free flow of information. We're going from local to global, slow to instant with everything. But before you have to pay for marketing and so on is starting to become essentially like free for you, or at very, very little costs. Like everybody can do it, not only a few people with a very high level of expertise. And of course, it runs like 24/7. Also, the crypto exchanges, they are always running. They're never being shut down. So we are starting to experience like a free flow of value and a complete like how to say paradigm shift, essentially how we see our global internet architecture. Yeah, and now of course when you develop a decentralized application, you need access to the blockchain, of course, and then the question is, if I don't run my own full node, whose full node do I use? Because either I'm running it on a data center or in a data somewhere, or I'm running it under the desk, but then it also really doesn't scale. And this is leading us to manage infrastructure. So managed infrastructure is essentially outsourcing all the management of blockchain resources to a specific provider. And this provider then takes care of security, maintenance, and so on. It has the tremendous benefit that typically it's a lot more cost efficient from you. For you, you have like access to the specific expertise, get the support you needed, but it's starting to become like a no-brainer for you. You're just using it, and you can focus like on your own decentralized application and on your own core know-how. And with this, of course, you can deploy a lot faster, and you can like reduce the whole complexity of what you would normally do and focus on the depth. And we are seeing, so this child has like several names. We are seeing it like a blockchain as a service, or BIS, or EBIS. This is like enterprise blockchain as a service, where you already provide enterprise utility as part of your offering as well. Also, some call it like a blockchain service provider. Then there's also like Web3 infrastructure provider, and there are a couple of nuances in it. But in general, this is what you see when you are looking at the different names and the nomenclature. Typically, it's provided as software as a service that you can like buy it on a monthly basis, and depending on how high your consumption is, the more typically you pay. So it's typically API based. When you send your transaction to the service provider, you're being billed, and then there's like a free contingent of, I don't know, 3, 5, 10 million transactions, and then you typically have to move towards like a paid plan. There are also some service providers, I think it's Alchemy and Fura, which doing it like compute based, so you can see every Ethereum API function has a certain compute number associated with it. And you can imagine this a little bit like crystals in your game, in your favorite mobile game, where you need to buy the crystals, and then something costs 5 crystals, something costs 10 crystals. So essentially you're moving towards like a credit format. I'm not a big fan of this, because essentially as a customer, I would like to use those services without really thinking about it and being able to calculate my costs. But if something costs 0.5 credits and something else costs 20 credits, you again have to do like a very thorough analysis where you are spending your credits and how much in the end you're going to pay for it. And maybe you don't even know it, because your users are using your dApp in a certain way, and then you have to run certain statistics. So I'm not a big fan of it, because essentially what the infrastructure provider is doing is to give his infrastructure costs one-to-one to the customer. And this is a topic which with the customer doesn't want to interact a lot more. So I, as a customer, I would like to have like a certain fixed price, or like a good understanding how my costs would scale with a certain demand. And I would not like to be like in the dark, or even be at risk when my users are utilizing my blockchain in a certain way, that suddenly my infrastructure costs are like really high. And then the user would like also, of course, complain, because he would receive like a very high bill again. So you're like out-tasking the risk again to the user. And this is, I don't think it's a good model, personally. There are some examples like Chainalysis for a blockchain as a service provider focused on compliance and anti-money laundering. Sorry, this should be like AML. So like when you are receiving a Bitcoin transaction, essentially like a bank is checking your Bitcoin address with Chainalysis. They're running through the whole chain and see if your Bitcoin address was at one time or the funding was at one time coming from the black market or other tainted funds. Then we see services like Blockdaemon, which are providing mainly node services. QuickNode is the same. Alchemy is also providing node services. Alchemy and Infura, they're like the largest one for Ethereum based tooling. So Infura is like founded by one of the Ethereum founders as well. Also like developer tooling that you can see like, oh, how many transactions failed actually, which I wanted to send and why did they fail? Did I put in the wrong syntax, for example? And this, of course, then makes it very comfortable for you as a dev developer to develop with those services to understand immediately what's going wrong when you're developing on it. Yeah, we have AWS, which are offering like Ethereum and Hyperledger APIs as well. Moralis is focused more like on Web3, so NFT management, on-chain data, and that stuff. Then we have a couple of analytic providers as well, like Dune is very known, Nansen, Messari. And then, of course, for the IOTA ecosystem, we are building Spice. So to provide node services, this is already running in the early access beta that you can provision a node within 4.5 minutes. You have a fully synchronized IOTA node on Shimmer, by which you can send your events. We want to make this like API based. This is currently in the making, that you do not even like run your own node, but that you can work on a consumption based model. And then, of course, we are providing like layer 2 as a service, and also like a certain enterprise utility. Also, as this is like our history from the IOTA Foundation, like digital identity management and secure data spaces. And how a blockchain infrastructure or managed infrastructure then looks like is typically like this, that here in the front, you have like the user with different types of clients. And then you have like a scalable API. And essentially what the user is doing is, instead of pointing all his endpoints here or all his clients to his own node, he's pointing them to the managed service provider. The managed service provider is running like a scalable backend, so he can like accept those requests via HTTPS or with WebSockets. And essentially then the service provider takes care about the whole scaling part. And it doesn't matter if you want to send like one transaction to the service or to the blockchain or to the Tangle, or if you want to send 100 or 1,000 transactions. This is then becoming the problem of the service provider, and you do not need to concern yourself with, do I need to run one server or 10 or maybe 100? I don't know. And this is like actually a big problem, because if you're running it yourself and you do not like cannot scale, of course it's impacting your decentralized application, because suddenly the users cannot work with it as smooth as they want, or maybe you even have an outage. But on the other hand, you might also run into the danger of over provisioning. So when you have like a lower load, maybe you're paying a lot of money for server capacity, which actually you do not use. No? And then again throws off your whole business model, and you are not as competitive as you want to be versus other providers. So it's going then to a scalable backend, the request. There typically, as a developer, you can see some statistics about your usage. And then in the scalable backend, it's going to like layer 2 smart contract nodes, so to layer 2 chains, or it's going to IOTA nodes or blockchain nodes. Many providers, they're also offering directly an IPFS gateway that you can also just say, I want to deploy a certain NFT image to IPFS. And the only thing you're getting back from your provider is where your image is stored. And the same counts as well for the transaction. So you're sending a transaction to the blockchain, you're getting the unique block ID back, and then you can immediately like also look it up. Hey, did this provider send my transaction the correct way to the blockchain? And because everything is like open and very transparent, you can immediately have like quality control of your provider as well. So you can see how long does it take, and also has the provider sent the transaction the correct way. Yeah, and now this leaves you essentially with the decision, make or buy, as it always comes down in big companies. Should I make it myself or should I buy it as a service? And of course, there's like this big, I would call it like, not really a dilemma, but different terms of how decentralized do I want to be? So of course I can run it myself. Then I'm like very decentralized because I'm independent with my infrastructure from the rest of the network. I just need to run my node. Now I need to like update my node. So, but this of course brings some hurdles. So am I really compliant, relevant? How do I integrate it with existing systems? How do I scale it? What I just talked about. Is it like really private? Am I setting it up the right way? Is there like a security bug? Am I keeping my node always up to date? Am I keeping my libraries like always up to date? Am I over provisioning or not? So I might have like really high costs, need to cater to the updates. And then, of course, user adoption uncertainties. Like, what happens if the technology changes? We saw this like a couple of times also with IOTA. Do I now need to rebuild the whole thing again? If the technology changes, but I'm 2 weeks on vacation, do I have access on my server? But if the new technology is like already getting rolled out quite fast, then if you don't update yourself, then you're a bit in trouble. So this like leaves you with the whole, like when you make it yourself, please wait while the wizard installs the software. And then of course you can like also like still argue, even if you install it in a cloud provider, uh, maybe you're using AWS or Azure or Google, for example, but then is it really decentralized when another 100 nodes are like also running there? So if you're like I call it like a hardcore enthusiast, then and you want to run the stuff yourself, then you might have like a really hard time. So as a best practice, it started to be established that you can like go with a multi-cloud strategy, for example. Like you can run your nodes on certain clouds to be, or data centers to be a bit more like independent. But there's like a common consensus that when you want to get things done fast, you want to focus on your core competency, and then you like sacrifice also a little bit of the fully 100% maximalist decentralized approach. Yeah. And when we look at the challenges, there are like numerous challenges. Like also, if you want to become like a blockchain provider, so there might be like performance issues because in the end you need to like handle transactions and volumes. You need to adopt to the requirements and to the demand on the network. So also as a provider, you want to provide like a dependable access point to your customers, which they can always reach. And then there are like always like two aspects, which is like availability and performance. So it needs to be, is it available? And if it's available, is the response as fast as I want it to be? We have the security concerns for protection against cyber threats and cyber attacks. And this is like a very valid concern, especially in the blockchain space, because we have like we have seen how smart contracts and bridges have been hacked like over the past year, especially through the DeFi summer in 2021. I think there was like almost no, I don't know if you remember these big boards I've like mainly seen in US companies, 0 days without an accident. And when you map this to the DeFi space, there's like a website which says like Web3 is going great, .io.com, but just Google it, Web3 is going great. And there you can see like what security issues have happened, that either a provider was hacked or that a smart contract was hacked and so on. So when everything is out in the open, security is becoming like a really big concern. Then you have the whole resource management. How do I provision power as fast as possible? Something which is not so relevant for the like for the sustainable blockchain technology. So we are at the moment like only working with IOTA, because at Spice we said we only want to work with green and sustainable technologies. But let's say you're providing you're working in the Bitcoin space, then energy needs are becoming like a real thing. This is why you are hearing crazy things like we need to build a big Bitcoin farm on a volcano and stuff like that. Scalability, of course, that you balance the growth with the decentralization and security. It also soon becomes like very complex, especially when you're managing several protocols as a provider, because every protocol has like its own nitty-gritty details, which you need to know. So, for example, with IOTA, when you have like a higher payload, you want to send more data to the transaction, to the Tangle. Then your proof of work is also increasing, so you need to plan for this as well. No? And like this, every protocol has like some of the details for which you need to understand how the protocol works, and then you need to adjust and cater to the very specifics of the protocol which you want to use. Interoperability is starting to become like a big thing as well, where we have seen like also companies which are like multi-chain, for example, which are like taking in like events or like oracles from various blockchains, and then of course you want to be the data between those blockchains also with bridges as interoperable as it could be. I think with Shimmer we have like an excellent starting base here with IOTA, simply because Shimmer is addressing like a lot of these concerns already of interoperability out of the box, that we do not need any bridges because the security is guaranteed through layer one. So you do not need to like stand up your own bridge and then be in the danger that this bridge might get hacked. And then, of course, there's also regulatory compliance. So when, let's say, there's a new GDPR law, like you also need to understand what this means actually to your own service. Yeah, and then there, of course, are like several advantages which are resulting out of this. So when you are outtasking your service to a provider, you get the expertise, you get a specialized know-how with somebody who knows what they are doing, get the whole customer support. If you have a problem, you have the whole monitoring. So there's like immediately coming back to managed services and incident management process going off when the monitoring is showing that you have like slow response times for the customer and so on, and then the provider is like, of course, investigating why these slow response times would happen. We take care of the whole scalability with an adaptive, how to say, resources to match this demand. We do this at a minimal price, of course, because then you also have like predictable operational costs. You out-task your whole security topic as well, because the provider needs to take care of it. And of course, then the provider is like providing like a high reliable endpoint and a high dependable endpoint. And we also talked about the compliance, and I wrote here tokens, because also for companies, it's like a huge pain in the neck to actually pay a blockchain service with tokens, or utility with tokens. And we see this, and they're like also on Ethereum, there are like some protocols which are dealing with data management, some are dealing with identity management, and so on. But we are not seeing it as integrated as in IOTA. And as a company, you're having real problems paying something with a token, simply because cryptocurrency is barely any company integrated in the bookkeeping processes with outgoing payments, incoming payments. So you typically also want a service provider for this as well. And this is why most of the companies can hold can hold tokens, for example, just as an asset in bookkeeping when they want to invest into an asset. But actually using cryptocurrency to pay for something is like one of the biggest red flags a company essentially has. And this leaves us with a conclusion here, not to focus on on your core business. So when you are like a app developer or a company, you're always thinking like, again, make or buy. Should I do this myself? And if I do not know how to do it myself, should I invest into building a core competency with something which is actually maybe not my core competency? And then typically I try to focus on my business, and everything which is not my own core competency, through which I generate my main value proposition for my customer. Typically, I'm trying to find organizations, developers, people, services that I can out-task this or outsource this. Yeah, and with Spice, I think this is my second to last slide. Let me look at the clock. Yeah, I think we are in good time. that we have some time for Q&A as well. So we are focusing on two main target groups. The first target groups are the builders, creators, and developers for Shimmer, because we are expecting like a huge influx of projects moving over towards Shimmer and towards IOTA due to the technical benefit it will bring. I don't know if you've seen the presentation from Billy yesterday. I would highly recommend it because it like really outlines the different criterias why you are building a blockchain and how you are building a blockchain, or in our case, the Tangle, how you are building a blockchain with the criteria that they become as performant as possible, and that you can give these competitive benefits to the users, that you're not, let's say, dependent by from a third party entity, that I would need to give my transaction to a miner and then the miner would do something with it. In worst case, he puts it into a sandwich attack and I get like the short end of the stick because I'm suddenly paying like a much higher conversion fee, and the miner is using this to create like additional revenues. And Billy outlined this like very well yesterday, that essentially the demand, or like what is important for me as a user, what brings me value, and what brings the miner or this provisioner value, they are very diametrical. This is what is like, I think the absolute the smartest thing what IOTA is doing is to combine this role of the miner and of the user into one role, so that I have total control over how I issue my blocks onto this network, and I pay what I set out to pay, and this is how I participate. And I essentially take out, say like decentralized system is like a system without a middleman, but you have still a middleman left in the typical blockchains. And with this, I really removed like the last middleman. And then I can start to also use it for better automation, for faster automation, and have a lot less dependencies. So we are building for like initially for the builders and creators and developers. For the projects which are going to move over towards IOTA. And then we also have like another half for enterprises and corporate developers, where we cater to those specific needs, which are typically not DeFi oriented. But when you look at, I don't have the slide unfortunately here, but when you look at the enterprise use cases, like almost all of them are data related. So it comes about, how do I share data with my partners in real time as fast as possible, so that I can adapt to changed market conditions as fast as possible? And then how do I ensure the integrity of the data, that it hasn't been manipulated, that it's like also coming from a trusted source? And when you look at those enterprise use cases, as I said, most of them are data related. So you have like authenticity of data, that your documents haven't been changed, that you can provide a transparent shipping path, for example, that you can do like cross-border transactions with little overhead, that you can incentivize, this is a token related like fractional ownership. If I want to buy a solar panel, for example, or building, and I as a micro investor can only afford, let's say, 500 euros, so suddenly you can like open up certain investment spaces also to a completely new investment audience. And this is like what is driving the enterprise focus. And we saw over the past years that a lot of enterprises, they started to create their own blockchain, and then they saw that they just don't have the market power, or like competitors won't move towards your blockchain, because of course they always think, if I am automotive company A, why should I move to the blockchain of my competitor? And then it pivoted a bit towards consortium blockchains, that enterprises are getting together to form a consortium. But of course, then you're again limited to this consortium to exchange transactions. So now with a lot more regulatory clarity, so it's good that, like we had the presentation of Mariana before, she's like highly engaged in those regulatory aspects, because like with those regulatory aspects, also a clarity comes for enterprises, and then those enterprises can understand better what they are allowed to do, under which conditions they can work in those public systems, what should they do, what should they not do. And at the moment, there's like, or like until now, there was like a big ambiguity if for the enterprises if they're standing in jail already, like with one leg when they are putting something onto a blockchain. And these regulatory aspects are providing like a lot more clarity. And so we are seeing now that a lot of enterprises are focusing again to understand better how they can utilize public and permissionless blockchains. And then, of course, when you're utilizing a public and permissionless blockchain, it needs to scale. There's like no way around it. No? You need like hundreds of thousands, ideally like millions of transactions per second in order to cater to the demand and to this global network which you want to provide in order to connect businesses without any intermediary in a trusted way. So thank you very much. I hope this presentation gave you some insights into the benefits of managed service provision, also into the challenges in which you would like normally run into. Of course, the power of choice is completely up to you. This is the awesome thing about it. We do not have this, how to say, forced dependency towards a large provider anymore. It's essentially up to us. But you can take some shortcuts. And if you want to take some shortcuts in the IOTA ecosystem, then please come to Spice. Please write us at holger@spice5.com, or also to hello@spice5.com, independent how you're interacting with IOTA. I think we can provide you with a nice solution and offer in the future. So thank you again. And then I think there's still some time. Yeah, 10 minutes, 9 minutes. For
Here we got plenty of time for the Q&A session. Thank you very much, first of all, for your presentation. It was very interesting to hear about the whole experiences you were able to garner with creating Spice5. I'm myself a developer as well, so I only see it mostly of the consumer side of things, right? So it was really, really interesting to hear what it takes to create those things or what you have to offer with Spice5.
And even on the consumer side, now you're seeing it, it's a bit like hidden away, but when you're using MetaMask, for example, MetaMask is connected to Infura, to the Infura backend, and OpenSea the same way. So there's really like also a scalability aspect for it. Like, how do I provision like a global software deployment in a way that in the end I can cater to those user demands in a highly scalable way. And then it's not about adding like 5 users or 100 users, but we are talking about like adding about 100,000 users a day or adding 500,000 users a day. And this is then where it's starting to become a bit challenging.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I even noticed at OpenSea, you were mentioning that for Infura, right? They had a lot of problems in the early days when everyone was looking for NFTs and where to get them. So it was definitely noticeable.
Yeah, exactly. And when Infura is down, then you can see that OpenSea is down, MetaMask is down, or you need to connect to a different Ethereum node. But in the stage of blockchain or DLT where we are now, there's still like a long way to go with regards to usability. I think it's now getting like better with different Web3 platforms. And I also think that the platforms we are seeing on Shimmer are like really nice and intuitively to use. And this is like the level we need to come to, but it's still not solved because also like MetaMask is a browser plugin. And when you are catching a virus or like a Trojan, then this is like the worst thing you can have because a browser plugin is like the worst place to essentially store your private keys and your private seed. And I don't know if you've ever signed something with MetaMask, but like as the average Joe, you see a bunch of numbers popping up, and I'm this with an arrow to there with like a nicely colored picture and a smart contract ID here to there, but I don't actually don't know what is now happening under the hood. And we are seeing this with like when wallets are getting hacked, when somebody like signed like a transaction, I don't know, 2 years ago or gave certain permissions 2 years ago, and now there's like a bug in this protocol, and now like a 2-year-old bug is being, or like a 2-year-old signature is being utilized to withdraw all of my funds, and then you see this like I don't know, it was like a week or 2 weeks ago where it was on Twitter by, was it Look on Chain, I think they posted it, how certain user funds are being like siphoned away from wallets where there was no outgoing transaction over the last 1 or 2 years, where the users just didn't use their private key because a bug was discovered. And then other websites are promoted where you can again check if you signed something a couple of years ago, which might get abused now. And all of this is, I think, just like crazy when you compare it to how I use like my normal iPhone, where in this case, like Apple is asking, do you want to give this app permission to use the camera? Do you want to give this app permission to use this specific photo or these 3 photos? And until we have this on the blockchain or for the usability, I think we still have a bit of a long way to go, to make it like as easy as possible to utilize. And we're seeing it with Firefly. I think this is a very good first step, that everything is like abstracted away into your private vault, and there's you still need to like sign it by unlocking your vault, and it's really encrypted. Nothing can like access it in Stronghold. This is the way to go, but ideally you have, of course, the full chain from the browser plugin to a certain wallet and then to a certain hardware wallet as well, that can be 100% sure that you know what you are doing when you are starting to become your own bank.
Definitely. I mean, even with MetaMask or other solutions similar to that, it all comes down to 2 things, essentially, right? For one, of course, education. People don't really know what a private key is. That's, I mean, maybe that's even the danger if you go the UI route or make it too easy to use, right? So that people are simply clicking on the big blue or green buttons and then just, sign some malicious transactions, right? And the other thing is, I mean, that comes with it is you have to also keep the user safe from himself or herself, right? Like
exactly.
you were mentioning Firefly.
It's even getting worse, because we are talking about like a decentralized web, and then essentially we expect the user or the average Joe to manage everything which is critical for him, like what Jelle yesterday said, like a driver's license, maybe my passport, my identity, my bank account. All of this we expect the average Joe to manage like in one small like wallet, and when this wallet gets hacked, essentially loses everything what he has stored in this wallet. So it's becoming like a huge single point of failure for the user. And the average Joe, if the average Joe doesn't have like a good user experience around it, I think like the whole crypto space will have a hard time to move out of this. Like, you need to be like a geek or nerd or a specialist, what is like always being associated with it, like towards the full mainstream in the end.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this even ties into the comment that Marco Bezier just left. By the way, his workshop is starting shortly, how to create an NFT collection on a Shimmer EVM network. So you might want to get ready for that or switch the room right now. But he was saying on something that you mentioned previously, 100% agreed. In my opinion, decentralized social media is going to be a big one. Unfortunately, the UX, that's what we were talking about, of things like Lens, for example, is still too poor to compete with Facebook, Instagram, etc., right? The big social media names. Also, he was mentioning that the really tough parts, in quotation marks, would be to battle the lock-in effect those networks have, or the social media networks have.
Yeah, I think Marco is a very smart guy. I talked with him a couple of times. I hold him in high regards. So I fully agree with him.
Yeah, but maybe coming back to the security aspect of the Firefly wallet, for instance, I mean, you are also, I would maybe say, or think that you are into the tech as well. So you definitely know about Stronghold features that are implemented, or maybe that were almost set as a base for the whole IOTA wallet thing, or IOTA ecosystem, right? So I mean, even in the documentation, it's like such an integral part that, and I think I like this about the IOTA ecosystem or the IOTA Foundation, that they really try to write it down in the documentation that this should be the number one priority, right? I mean, if you want to have things like digital identity and such important things in that.
Exactly.
So another thing, question that I would have for you is, you were mentioning this sentence, should I buy it or build it myself, right? And
Make or buy.
a question, yeah, and a question that came up in my mind was how much effort went really into the whole Spice 5 infrastructure. So a roughly estimate maybe on that one.
Oh, it's hard to estimate it by with hours. At the moment, we are 7 persons working on it, but we are also working together with AWS. So we have like a partnership also with AWS, and there we also get quite a lot of integration support directly from AWS. So I also hold them like in high regards. It has already been quite an amount, but we are like seeing a light at the end of the tunnel to offer like more services, I think like quite in near time. So I think we are very well geared in the, say, for the timeline when EVM is then really moving to Shimmer, out of the testnet to Shimmer, and that we maybe like with this or then after this in the coming months when the traction is starting to pick up and we see more and more success stories about the Shimmer performance and the DeFi projects there, that we are then also ready.
That's great to hear. Another question that came up was the documentation aspect, right? So you basically are creating not only a seamless, or you try to create a seamless user experience for developers, but you also need to somehow condense all this knowledge or this use cases into a let's say, neat and tidy documentation. Were there any issues with that? Because I mean, it's even hard to basically get any idea across through communication, right? And you have now to build some tools that could potentially be, I don't know, be the cause of losing millions of dollars if it's not done correctly, right? So do you maybe want to say something on that?
Yeah, like we have an advantage that we are not developing let's say, the node software ourselves, but that the IOTA Foundation is developing the node software. So the APIs for the node software, they're like also very well documented on Swagger for every developer. And you can use exactly this documentation one by one and then just go to the Spice API and send your transaction the same way like you would normally send it to your own node. You can just send it to Spice with everything you want to do. And for the business and enterprises, you are absolutely right. There we have something in mind, but this might then be something for the next TangleCon, I think.
All right, so we're still not there yet, but that's great to hear that you're also keeping that back in your minds or in your heads. And maybe another question. So you were mentioning IPFS and all these other technologies, right? So why did the decision come? Was it because of the whole NFT boom that was happening a couple of years ago, or did you maybe even just have a general approach of that whole, let's say, decentralized peer-to-peer functionality?
For IPFS, we still have to see if we are going to integrate it. I saw it with some other providers that they integrated, but now because NFTs are so popular, there is already a lot of professional IPFS hosting or decentralized file storage hosting. So maybe we'll also just tap into this in the end. The IPFS is like a string as part of the NFT, as you know. If it lies on, I don't know, IPFS.io or spice5.com, and there are some nodes, I think it doesn't really matter. We are also focusing on our core competencies that we can provide the IOTA and Shimmer ecosystem like quick with utility. And if, because we are asking ourselves, of course, the same question, like make or buy. And if there are already IPFS providers, then we do not need to do it ourselves if they can do it like in a very well way. And then we would also work together with them.
All right. I think this would have been all the questions that are out there right now. Wait, there just came one more in. From Christian Wendler, there must be a crystal clear benefit. Wait, give me a second. For the average user, not just a look that's X and Y, but with smart contracts. And it needs to have a super simple UI everyone can understand right from the start. So not really a question, but rather observation that we were just discussing in this whole Q&A session right now.
Yeah, the proof is in the pudding, and blockchain is like a comparatively expensive technology if you compare it with a local database. Like expensive not in terms of fees, but also in technical complexity, and of course it is a much lower performance than the local database. So you can only or should only like use it for use cases where this expensive computing or the data integrity aspect is like really required in the end. And when I'm seeing like during the boom since, I don't know, 2017, 2018, how many blockchain startups there were, I'm like, I've seen so many cases also at the IOTA Foundation where I was also thinking, poof, like 99% of those use cases just use a central database, and it will be like a lot more performant. But blockchain was like such of a buzzword, and I think it's like also good now that we are have this bear market, and that like a lot of bubbles were bursting, because we see that the VCs, they are now doing like a lot more due diligence as well for the projects. When you wanted to raise money like 2 years ago and you said, I want to build a decentralized exchanges for horses, then essentially, yeah, awesome, here are $50 million. And I'm quite happy that the whole hype is like starting to ebb down a little bit, and that now the serious aspect of the technology is being put more into the foreground.
Yeah, definitely. I know exactly what you are saying. It was like exchanges were popping up left and right. It was nothing new brought to the table. It was just a copy of what's already been up there. And yeah, like you were mentioning, for most use cases that are not really tied to DeFi in a sense, were just not really usable, or you didn't even need the whole blockchain technology for that. But it's mostly, I think, the best use case, or one of the biggest use cases, the shared database, right? For companies or businesses because of regulations and other aspects.
I think this is going to provide like a tremendous value, because if you can share your data in a secure way without any intermediary as a company in a global network where your data gets propagated around the world between 3 to 8 seconds, when you can like onboard your trade partners without having a complicated one-to-one connection between your backend and each backend of your trade partners, but when everybody can just like tap into this, I was call it like a global data backbone, then you have completely different means of automating something. You can like automate on a global scale in a completely decentralized environment, because you have the data security, because you have because you don't have a single point of failure, because you have how to say propagandation mechanism for this data to be circulated around the globe within a couple of seconds. And I think this will have a tremendous impact on how we automate things in the future without any intermediary in a global economy.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm so excited to see what new use cases will be popping out that nobody has thought of yet. And it's slowly getting time to get the next speaker in. So
yeah,
I would just say thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone on the screen, and enjoy the rest of TangleCon. Bye-bye.
I'm sure we'll see us at the next TangleCon. Right. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.